Politics on the Edge lecture series event on Penn and Black Lives, Perspectives from West Philadelphia. My name is Jeff Green, Director of the Andrea Mitchell Center for the Study of Democracy, and I want to welcome you all and thank you all for being here with us this evening. The Politics on the Edge lecture series has become one of the more visible and vibrant initiatives at the Mitchell Center, and it's covered a lot of ground over the last 3+ years. Last year, for example, we had an event by a leading activist in the Hong Kong protests from Hong Kong in the fall, and in the spring, an event on new forms of conspiratorial thinking arising in our midst. The event tonight brings our focus closer to home, which seems appropriate given the events of the past months, Penn's commitment to making civic engagement a special priority this year and beyond, and the Mitchell Center's own interest in raising the question of its own and Penn's own social responsibility. Already this fall, the Mitchell Center hosted a major event on the question of Penn's financial responsibility in Philadelphia, and I see the discussion tonight as a companion event that no doubt will further probe questions of race and social justice in West Philadelphia. I want to thank our student partners at the Philomathean Society, and above all, Sarah Ligari, who will be moderating the event, and I'll turn things over to him right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, and we always appreciate the Andrea Mitchell Center for helping us with our Politics on the Edge events. It's a great initiative that I hope we keep continuing. For the Philomathean Society was founded in 1813, we're a student-run literary society that regularly arranges events, professor teas, art exhibits, and more. If you'd like to know more, if you're a Penn student and would like to join, please do check out our Facebook page. With that being said, let's introduce the panelists for today. First, let's introduce Rick Krajewski, who is a Penn alumnus, a West Philadelphia neighbor, criminal justice organizer, educator, and artist, running for state representative in the 188th State House District. Since 2016, Rick has been an organizer with Reclaim Philadelphia, fighting to put working class people at the forefront. In the 2017 general election, Rick led a team of 200 volunteers in our neighborhoods to elect Larry Krasner, the most progressive district attorney in the country, on historic platform of ending mass incarceration, ending cash bail, and fighting corruption in the police department and within the DA's office itself. Next, we have Paul Prescod, who is a social studies teacher at Kensington Health Sciences Academy and political liaison with the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers. He is also a contributing editor at Jacobian magazine. And last but not least, we have with us Jamie R. Gauthier, a born and raised West Philadelphian who was elected to represent the 3rd City Council District in November 2019. With an eye towards tackling gentrification and poverty, her agenda prioritizes creating and preserving affordable housing, improving educational outcomes, connecting residents to family-sustaining jobs, and advancing small businesses. Prior to the City Council candidacy, she was the executive director of the West Fairmount Park, which carried out vital improvements in the West Fairmount Park and served with the Local Initiative Support Corporation, which helped develop affordable housing across Philadelphia. She will be joining us shortly. With that being said, I would like for Rick to please introduce himself and deliver a 5-minute speech. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to the Mitchell Center and Philomathean Society for putting this together. For folks who have not met me before, my name is Rick Krajewski. I am a community organizer, West Philly neighbor. I live on the 4900 block of Chestnut Street. And I am the now Democratic nominee for state representative of the 188th District of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. The 188th District includes West and Southwest Philadelphia, the neighborhoods of Cobbs Creek, Cedar Park, excuse me, a little sneezy today. Neighborhoods of Clark Park, Cobbs Creek, Cedar Park, Spruce Hill, Walnut Hill, Spruce Hill, University of Pennsylvania, the entirety of its campus is in the district, University of Sciences, and parts of Drexel as well. I'm also a Penn alum. I graduated from the engineering school in 2013. And while I am extremely grateful for the world-class education that I received at the University of Pennsylvania, as a working class Black undergraduate, it was immediately obvious to me how many resources were being centralized within our institution while the greater community of West and Southwest Philadelphia suffered from divestment and university-sponsored gentrification. Children of CEOs, princes, and other elites walked our campus grounds, while just outside of our bubble was, and still is, one of the most economically divided zip codes in our city, 19143. In the same geographic area, you have residents living in deep poverty mere blocks from $500,000 houses. A 20-minute walk from Penn Alexander School, a highly desired public school financially supported by Penn, leads you to Avery D. Harrington School, a West Philadelphia public school struggling with a lack of resources and overcapacity class sizes. An uprising in our residential neighborhood was responded to with overwhelming military force, with the Philadelphia Police Department and campus police coordinating, while tear gas and rubber bullets rained down from SWAT forces, indiscriminately hitting elders and young bystanders. And a gun epidemic rages on, a tragic symptom of systemic poverty colliding with a public health crisis. So incoming freshmen are often instructed not to stray too far beyond university lines. When I was a freshman, the boundary was 40th and Market. However, as Penn acquired more property and exerted more influence, that line was pushed westward. Students are told it's for their own safety, but it also serves the purpose of shielding us from the divestment, mass policing, and hyper-focused development that has been spurred in West and Southwest Philadelphia, and our university has been complicit. In 2015, driven by my commitment to West Philadelphia and a desire to expand access to education resources, I began teaching volunteer classes at Huey Elementary School, at the time a public school on 52nd and Pine. I taught 5th and 6th graders basic computer programming skills because I knew from my background that many inner city kids were not exposed to STEM fields at an early age. For 6 months, we instilled a sense of wonder in our students. They were so eager to learn, and it seemed as though the possibilities were endless. But in the beginning of 2016, I was told that our program would be discontinued without any further explanation. I was dumbfounded. Our program, which was part of an outreach initiative run by Moelis Access Science, a Penn project, was callously pulled and transferred to another school. I later found out that this was because Huey was an underperforming school, quote unquote. And as such, it was shuttered and converted to Global Leadership Academy, which is a charter school. My heart was broken when I had to go into that classroom and tell our students we wouldn't be teaching anymore. I could see the disappointment in their face. And I had to live with the feeling that perhaps I was one more disappointment in a life of several. Had Penn paid the same attention to Huey School that it does to Penn Alexander, it could have been a well-performing school. It could have had adequate student-teacher ratios, appropriate funding for school supplies, and children who excelled because they were given the support to do so. Instead, the murals of Malcolm X on its exterior were replaced with cold gray and blue paint. And Global Leadership Academy more closely resembles a prison than a school. I believe it is time for Penn to step down from its ivory tower and have a real mutual partnership with all of West and Southwest Philadelphia. This could mean community benefit agreements where community members are given real input on land usage and development. Adopting affordable housing practices to keep both students and our surrounding community housing at fair rates. And adopting reinvestment policies like pilots to put money back into the public resources that our university benefits from. Transforming Penn's relationship to its surrounding neighborhood will not be an easy task. It will require all of us, elected officials, community leaders, students, faculty, and university administration, making a bold commitment to a partnership that centers the needs of our residents rather than the needs of those attached to the university. Until this happens, until Penn deprioritizes expanding its profit and influence, we are rehashing a conversation that has been had for decades. Those are my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. If you could have Paul now, please.
All right, thank you. Thanks everyone for putting this together and everyone attending. As was said, my name is Paul Prescod. I live in West Philadelphia. I teach in Kensington. I teach at a public school. So I'm going to be talking tonight about what Penn can do for the city as it relates to public education. And I'm going to latch on to one thing Rick said, which was pilots. Over half the students in the school district of Philadelphia are Black. And we know that across the country, segregation in education still persists, and in some cases has even gotten worse since the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. There are vast inequities between schools that are disproportionately white and higher income, and schools that are disproportionately Black and lower income. And so some of you might already know these facts, but let me start by painting a picture of what conditions are like in the school district of Philadelphia right now. Most teachers work and most students learn in buildings that are literally falling apart. Buildings that have asbestos, mold, and lead. Last year, a few schools had to shut down and be relocated because of asbestos that was too dangerous to be around. So it's not an exaggeration to say that children are literally being poisoned by going to school. My first year as a teacher, I taught at Bodine High School, which is a very good school in the city, but every time it rained, we had to put out buckets to catch leaking water. 2 years ago, the roof at a school in South Philadelphia caved in when it rained. And somehow we expect students to be getting a high quality education in these conditions. And also think about the message this sends to these kids on a psychological level to go into these buildings every year. The message is loud and clear. The society does not value as much. We also face a very serious staff shortage. It's normal to have 30 or 40 kids or even more kids in your classroom. For many years, schools did not have a full-time nurse. 1 year, 2 students died because a nurse was not on site when they had a medical emergency. Our counselors have caseloads that are too high to effectively give the assistance these students need. Teachers a while ago went 5 years without a contract or raises. And last month, our contract expired and we are again without a contract. So when you look at all of this, it's no wonder that we face a teacher shortage. It's no wonder that our schools are not performing like those in Lower Merion. So to put it simply, the only way we're going to turn the situation around and create the schools our students deserve is through a massive infusion of funding and resources and a massive redistribution of wealth towards the public sector. And this is where Penn comes in. Penn does not pay taxes because they are deemed a nonprofit, what we call a mega nonprofit. This is despite the fact that they're one of the wealthiest universities in the country and have an endowment of over $14 billion. I'll repeat that, $14 billion in their endowment. And a lot of this money is not even being used for its operating budget. So if Penn is serious about giving back to the community, they need to start contributing money to the city for their property taxes, which is where most of the revenue to fund public schools in this city comes from. This is what we call pilots or payments in lieu of taxes. And bear with me as I drop some numbers here, but the Penn for Pilots campaign proposes that Penn pay 40% of what they owe in property taxes. And recently it's calculated that they owe $91 million. And so 40% of that would be $36 million. So while that sounds like a lot of money, it is literally 0.3% of their endowment. Every other Ivy League in the country pays pilots, so there's no reason Penn can't join them. And the movement for pilots is growing. So Penn can either choose to be on the right side of this issue or choose to be on the wrong side of the issues that the surrounding community cares about. And now is the time. The school district is estimating a $1 billion shortfall over the next 5 years. And the current situation is already unacceptable. If we go through another round of austerity and cuts, we're looking at a disaster situation. And we are all having to sacrifice during this pandemic, and Penn can do the same by paying its share in taxes or voluntarily reducing the salaries of their administrators. I just saw yesterday in the news that the president of Penn, who makes almost $4 million a year will not be taking a pay cut like some of their other Ivy League colleagues have chosen to do. When it comes to education, you have people out there who will say, you know, you can't just throw money at the problem. So let's again be very clear about what this revenue, if Penn started paying pilots 0.3% of their endowment, what it would go towards. It will be for buildings that are fit for human beings, class sizes that can actually support individual attention, enough staff to keep students safe, a living wage for paraprofessionals and other school support staff. This is what it would go to. Education is a fundamental human right. So if Penn says that they care about Black lives and care about the surrounding community, then fall in line with the rest of us and contribute money towards the education of Philadelphia students. And I'll end my opening remarks there.
Thank you for those remarks. I would now like to invite Councilmember Jamie Gauthier to deliver her remarks.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank the Andrea Mitchell Center and the Philomathean Society for inviting me to be a part of this conversation on a topic that carries such vital importance, not just for me, but for residents throughout West and Southwest Philadelphia. The question of how Penn interacts with and should interact with Black lives is not a new one by any means, but the social upheaval in the wake of the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others at the hands of a system that oppresses Black and brown people by design has shined a light on the history of oppression that people of color have experienced in this country since its earliest days. I want to be clear, throughout history, the University of Pennsylvania has profited off of the backs of Black people. And so if Penn is truly interested in righting the wrongs of the past, they need to do much more than we've seen historically and than we're seeing right now. And we can begin to understand how we got to this point by considering Penn's history in West Philadelphia. Like many institutions, Penn profited off of slavery. There's no record of enslaved people building the university's campus, but some of Penn's early trustees and faculty owned slaves. And in a time of financial need, the university purposely sought to raise money from slave owners. And in more recent history, as a part of urban renewal, the largely failed national program that cleared land for redevelopment, various arms of state, local, and federal government used eminent domain power to acquire property for Penn, which would ultimately become the University City Science Center. And as a part of that process, working class Black people were forced from their homes along the Market Street corridor. Of the thousands of people displaced for this project back in the 60s, more than 75% of those residents were Black. So this redevelopment destroyed the fabric of long-standing neighborhoods and displaced Black families from a community that had been there for at least 100 years. Protests from area residents fell on deaf ears in Penn's administration at the time, and the legacy of their poor community relations decisions are still playing out to this very day. And so there's a deep mistrust of Penn within our Black communities, and understandably so. And so the big question is, what responsibility do Penn and other institutions in our district, like CHOP, have to repair their past wrongs? I mean, think about it. My district has 2 of the zip codes with the highest concentration of COVID cases. Our neighborhood schools, as we've just heard, are consistently failing our students. Gun violence is traumatizing our communities on a daily basis. Unemployment is higher than it's been in recent memory. So what can we demand from these well-resourced institutions? And I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about medical care, I'm talking about education programs, I'm talking about research and data gathering, I'm talking about trauma-informed programs and services. And I'm also talking about workforce development, jobs and procurement that are focused not just on our city, but on Penn's immediate surrounding neighborhoods. all of that said, I think it's also important to acknowledge that Penn does do good for Philadelphia and West Philadelphia in particular in terms of job production, local procurement, and support of local education programming. Recently, after the onset of COVID, Penn put about $5 million towards relief for employees and small businesses in West Philly. I appreciate that in all of Penn's efforts, but that does not mean that we can't and shouldn't ask Penn to do more and continue to critically evaluate their efforts to support our West Philadelphia and Southwest Philadelphia communities. And another example, what Penn has done for the students who attend Penn Alexander is wonderful, but there is a question as to whether this work, well, I don't even think it's a question. We know that this work contributed to gentrification by raising property values in the catchment area, and in turn made the student population less diverse over time. And so what I really want to see is for Penn and the other institutions helping to turn every school in West Philadelphia into a model school, because that is what equity would look like. Speaking of schools in the broader West Philadelphia community, Penn and other institutions should absolutely pay pilots, and these payments should be directed well, certainly these payments should help the city, but a large portion of them should be directed to the neighborhoods impacted by the development of the institution. As we've heard, Penn is the only Ivy League institution that does not make pilot payments, and I don't think that's acceptable. Penn paid pilots in the early 90s, and they should begin to pay them again. I'm still relatively new as a council member, but this is my general philosophy when it comes to Penn. It is an incredible resource, but our community is not benefiting as much as it could and should, and I very much want to see that change. And so with that, I'll hand it back over to Paul. Thanks again for having me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Councilmember Gauthier, for those remarks. For that being said, we will now move on to asking questions. We have a list of questions that we've already prepared based on the questionnaire we put on our Facebook page and distributed within our society. I am going to be broadly going over some major issues and asking questions within them, at the end of which we'll be taking questions from the audience. If you're in the audience, you can start sending in questions now, and we'll look through them and select questions after we've gone through our current list. With that, some of the questions will be directed towards all panelists. Some are specifically targeted questions. If at any point another panelist feels like adding on to what a panelist has said, you can feel free to jump in right after they're done. With that being said, our first question is for Councilmember Gauthier. It's, most Penn students are only in Philadelphia for a few years, leading to constant turnover and a lack of consistency in, for example, volunteer organizations. How can Penn students thoughtfully engage with the neighborhood as community members and volunteers without creating even more harm?
Sure. So Penn students are absolutely a part of our community. I think they should get to know our community and get involved and engaged. But I think that engagement has to be beneficial for all parties. It can't just be students taking opportunities to research our communities and learn about our communities and build their skill set up by practicing on our communities, right? And so I think to the extent that students are truly listening to and respecting communities to find out how they can participate in the rich culture that's already there and how they can add value. And if both sides understand that, the terms and even the length of the relationship, then that's a great thing. But too often I see these situations where students are benefiting and they're building their skill sets, and I'm unclear about whether our neighborhoods are benefiting. And so the engagement has to be very intentional and respectful, and it has to absolutely contribute something to the community.
Thank you. So then the next question, which is related, is for Rick. It's, a lot of Penn classes such as urban studies encourage students to engage with West Philadelphia outside the bubble. What are your thoughts on this, and do you think it is effective or just merely cosmetic?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to kind of reiterate what the council member said, I think it's harmful to think of the surrounding community as like something to be researched or as like a science subject, right? I think that students should be engaging in West and Southwest Philly as like residents of this area that care about its well-being, that care about the flourishing of like all of its resources. And so it is a good thing for the students to actually inhabit the surrounding community, but to do so from a level playing field, not from a sense of, investigating the community or even from a lens of saviorism, to sort of expand on the question around engagement and like volunteering. I think that students could be clearer about like their stake and why they want to volunteer, why they want to learn more about the district and our community. Students who live off campus are affected by affordable housing. They're affected by, especially speaking as a person who was a Black student, they're affected by over policing and profiling. They're affected by addressing issues around mass transit. So I think if we can push and agitate students to be clearer about their own stake for why they need to or wish to engage in the surrounding neighborhood, then we can have healthier relationships.
Definitely, yeah. And on a related note, I would like to ask Paul, as a teacher activist in West Philadelphia, do you think projects such as the West Philly Tutoring Project, in which Penn students, well, at least now, virtually tutor students in the West Philadelphia schools, do more harm than good? Additionally, the question asks, how do West Philly students perceive Penn students in general?
Well, on the question of whether it's harm and good, I mean, it's hard to answer that in a broad stroke. I mean, what I'll say, and I think this relates, I think, to another question I saw in the chat. I mean, to be clear, there's nothing wrong necessarily with some of Penn's outreach programs and, like the program Rick talked about with the after school program. There's nothing wrong with that in itself, but we shouldn't operate under the fantasy that we could plug the holes in the system through those programs. And those won't be enough. And honestly, frankly, if the choice was between having those programs or pilots, I'd rather the money. I mean, because ideally you'd have a situation like there's nothing wrong with Penn students tutoring, but ideally you'd have a situation where this could be done in-house, by maybe teachers or staff members that know the kids better or are from the neighborhoods that they're from. There's no inherent reason that we would need Penn to do that if we got the funding in the first place. To take care of that. And in terms of how students perceive Penn students, currently I don't teach in West Philly. I did a few years ago. Students describe the experience. I was teaching at Motivation High School at 59th and Baltimore Avenue. If they take the trolley down south on Baltimore Avenue, they didn't talk about Penn students specifically, but they did remark it like, wow, once you reach a certain point, things really change. Clearly there's more money, there's more investment in a certain area, and clearly these people are looking different than we do. So that's kind of what I heard. I mean, it's no secret about the gentrification and obviously how different it looks in West Philly depending where you are.
Yeah, definitely. So with that being said, I'll be moving on to the next portion, which is regarding COVID, which is, the elephant in the room, I suppose, today. So the first question, this is for anyone can answer this. In what ways has COVID highlighted or changed the dynamics at play in West Philly between residents and the universities?
I think COVID has changed things in that it's there are whole parts of our city that are inaccessible now, that were formerly accessible to students, the public, residents, and the like. I also, though, think that COVID has made things harder economically for residents who were depending on the university for work. And I think COVID, for me, has also highlighted inequities that exist, right? At the same time that we have this world-class institution in our midst, we've suffered the most from COVID, right? And people are able to access resources like the Hospital of University of Pennsylvania if they have insurance, but people who are not, and sorry, Penn has also invested in SARE, so I don't want to make it seem like that's not the case, but it's still not the same as having insurance that gets you access to high quality medical care. And a lot of folks are left having to figure out how they're going to navigate this disease from the perspective of getting information and from the perspective of getting high quality care. So those are some things that stand out for me.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone else would like to respond.
Yeah, I'll just chime in real quick. I think it has highlighted just how, like, the dynamics of the relationship between the university and the surrounding area, just in how much of a economic impact it has, both in terms of the relationship of residents who are employed or relate to university, but then also just the surrounding community. I think it also has demonstrated to me just like the relationship between community and the university when it makes decisions. Like, as far as I know, I don't believe that there was like any kind of community table that was put together when the university decided about opening or around like the hybrid opening or any of its decisions around the semester, which, like, when you're deciding whether 10,000 kids are going to come back or not to a physical area, that feels like something you should actually be consulting like the neighboring residents about. And I don't think that happened. And I think that's indicative of a larger problem of like not actually having these kinds of cross community relationships when the university makes decisions.
Could I one thing? Yeah, and I think I mean, COVID in general, and obviously Penn did not cause COVID, but it's just even demonstrating more dramatically this need for revenue. And, you know, without federal aid, I mean, state and municipal governments are going to be in line for some really brutal austerity. I mean, we already saw in Philly with last budget. And I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the election, and maybe there's more hope of federal aid afterwards. But again, I mean, it's really scary if there's another round of austerity for everyone, but thinking about schools, it's going to be really bad. So I think just even more highlights, like, we need all the revenue we can get. And it's not just Penn. We need to be taxing Comcast and the natural gas in this state that is left untaxed. But, you know, really highlights, like, we need to find every source of revenue. Everyone needs to contribute, and that includes Penn.
Thank you. So the next question is actually very related to what Rick just talked about as well. And I see Nippon Cottage also is asking a similar question in the chat. And it's related to how members of the West Philadelphia community have advocated against Penn calling students back for the spring semester, citing an increased COVID risk in West Philadelphia. Considering how COVID death rates skew towards people of color, do you think it is irresponsible for Penn to choose to hold a hybrid semester in the spring? And combined with that, what do you think are some successful models of engaging the West Philadelphia community in making this decision?
Yeah, I think in regards to the hybrid model, it sort of seems like it was an attempt at a compromise that ended up not really satisfying anyone because you still have some students that are still on campus, which has a risk. You have professors and faculty and everyone trying to navigate the hybrid model. So it does, and it feels like something that was an attempt to like satisfy a lot of stakeholders without actually having the conversation to come up with a solution that would satisfy those needs. So in terms of what I believe could have been a good, successful model, would have been for the university to come up with, in terms of, you know, community leaders, RCOs, local block captains, elected officials, and to come up with some kind of committee that could have been in consultation with the university in regards to not just reopening, but also just how the university should operate throughout COVID period, in regards to the opening of the starting of the semester, but also just generally in the functions of this large body during a health epidemic. You know, I think that would have been the right way to do this.
Thank you. Yeah. Would anyone else like to respond to that? All right then. So just to backtrack a bit on the topic of education, because I see there's a question that I'd just like to get to. It asked, sorry, just pulling it up. Yeah. Paul, you and Rick made a strong case that public education funding is a racial justice issue for students. But how is it a racial justice issue for workers? How does race play a role in public sector employment in Philadelphia?
I could start in on that one. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, nationwide and you know, in this state and in this city, Black workers are actually disproportionately public sector workers, and many of these public sector jobs, as my jobs, are, you know, pretty good, stable union jobs. So, you know, these cuts to the schools, of course, they're affecting students, but of course they're affecting teachers. So when schools are closed, when staff is cut, again, you're talking about a disproportionately Black workforce. And this applies to all public entities because, you know, this austerity is going to be affecting sanitation workers who have been fighting in the city for hazard pay and PPE, postal workers. You know, these are all jobs, especially in a city like Philadelphia, that have a disproportionate Black workforce. So yeah, we really should be thinking of these things as all connected, and even, you know, thinking about dining hall workers on Penn's campus. You know, this is all tied together.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think Paul really nailed it on the head. That I think this is an opportunity to think about solidarity across various sectors when it comes to workers and the fact that we have a Black majority workforce. But I think generally, you know, in terms of like work and labor and how this is a racial justice issue, you know, school and the education system is one of the earlier ways that we prepare young people to become workers, right? Like we are educating them, and the foundation of their education determines what kind of like career or profession they take on moving forward. So if we don't have equitable funding, like we are perpetuating the structures around, you know, racism and labor that can often cause disproportionately Black and brown people to end up in lower wage work. So to me, that's also how this intersects with it being a justice issue for workers, because more equitable education means more equitable work generally.
And on a related note, and this is from Catherine Blunt, given the available data regarding racial and economic disparities in West and Southwest Philly neighborhoods and schools, the city of Philadelphia should intentionally use its public high schools to grow and hire its own workforce. This would provide meaningful employment for our residents and needed income in our neighborhoods. To all panelists, how would you make this plan of action happen, and through engaging the school district of Philadelphia and city government?
I think we have to engage the district much more intentionally around the jobs that exist, right? And so I agree with you that as a city, we should be hiring folks who live here, and so that they can get access to good jobs. The obvious thing to do is engage with high schools, and I think the engagement is around the work that exists. So maybe we can build in internships, right, directly with the city. One of the programs that I really like at the city is called PowerCorps. It's a program that's connected to AmeriCorps, and it trains young people, many of whom are returning citizens, in various areas of the city's work. So the water department, for example, has a PowerCorps program where they have young people going out to learn about green stormwater infrastructure. I think we should be doing the same across the city, particularly at this time when we're seeing so much in the form of gun violence. We need to have paths to good jobs that pay a fair wage for people in our neighborhoods.
All right, great. Would anyone else like to respond to that? Go for it, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I've had this dream for a while that we could have this huge jobs program of renovating our school buildings and making them energy efficient. Not only obviously cleaning out the poison in them, but putting on solar panels and retrofitting them. And I agree with the council member about there are existing jobs, but I do think we're going to have to think of how to create new good jobs. And I think starting with stuff around building trades, apprenticeship programs, is a good thing. And so I think we got to have to think big of like what is useful work, not just building more condos, but like what about renovating our existing schools and creating jobs through that. And of course, I mean, that gets complicated because a lot of that does have to happen at the state and federal level, not just the city level. But I think that's where we should be looking towards. And something like renovating the schools, literally everyone wins. You create jobs, you improve the schools for families and teachers and students. So I think that's kind of the path we should be looking towards.
Yeah, the last thing I'll just add real quick is I think all of those are great answers and I support all of them. I think there's also a piece around incentivizing young people to just like work in the government and to like have them even think that that's like a path for them to do. And I think in this way it can be symbiotic where like if we have these mass job programs, if we present more paths to employment, whether it's in the trades or technical careers or even in improving the school districts, in that way, we're also showing that government cares for our communities and that it is willing to invest in our communities. And so when young people feel the impact of government more in their surrounding areas, then they feel more connected to it, right? So I think there's also a piece here that's like very symbiotic and is on the responsibility, I think, of the school district, but also the city in providing like a real good faith effort in showing our young people that we're like willing and ready to invest in them.
Thank you. So we have a lot of great questions coming up related to the topics we just discussed. We'll try getting to them towards the end, so that we can go through all the major subtopics first before we can get into more specific detailed questions regarding the issues we've already discussed. With that being said, let's pivot towards policing in Philadelphia. So the question that I have is, in light of revelations that Penn funded the PPD, Penn announced it would no longer purchase PPD fundraiser tickets. Does this go far enough? And if not, what more does Penn need to do?
No, I don't think it goes far enough. I think that Penn should not provide the fundraiser tickets, but beyond that, Penn should contribute to the conversation that's happening now in our city about how we transform and reimagine public safety. And I think that would include everything from looking at its own police force. Penn should not be, I guess, aiming to protect itself from its neighbors and the community that it sits in. Penn should be looking to invest in its surrounding community. So what does that look like, right? If Penn were to begin decreasing its investment in police and increasing its investment in our neighborhoods, I think it might find a different dynamic and less need to feel that it has to protect itself. Secondly, I think that Penn needs to contribute to this overall conversation of what is needed in our city. So it's good that the fundraiser tickets won't be purchased anymore, but instead of that, maybe Penn can help, to send crisis workers to neighborhoods that are suffering from trauma, or can help in some other way to alleviate a lot of what is happening in West and Southwest Philadelphia right now around violence. I would love to engage Penn in that conversation.
Yeah, I think that Penn needs to be taking a lot more initiative in transforming the way it in our city does policing. I mean, there are parts of the surrounding neighborhood where there are 5 overlapping police forces between Penn Police, University Campus Police, Drexel Police, and the PPD. We're probably one of the most policed areas in the Northeast corridor. And I think that's unacceptable. Particularly when, as Paul mentioned, we are like scraping for revenue and we're spending all of this money on policing the surrounding area in a way that only causes the residents and Black and brown folks to suffer. So if we were to reimagine policing, we could have more smarter ways to address the gun violence epidemic. And then we could also potentially relieve some funding to address some other real needs that we have right now.
I guess I also wanted to add, Rick and I were together on 52nd Street on May 31st, right? And what we saw were police that positioned themselves like they were in a war with the people in our community, and Penn was there, right? And so I guess that's so striking to me. Penn is not at war or shouldn't be at war with the surrounding community, nor should the police. So we have to find different means of interacting with community and different ways of investing in our community that would decrease the need for or the feeling that we have to have such a strong police presence.
That's a great segue into the next question, which is from Dorothy Roberts, which is, do the panelists have any recommendations about Penn police related to their comments and actions about the relationship between Penn and the West Philadelphia communities?
Yeah, I think the Penn police force should be dismantled and transformed into something that's more mental health, social service oriented. I think, like Jamie mentioned, something like crisis workers that could actually respond to conflicts that happen in the surrounding area. I think that'd be a great idea.
I agree. And I think that would be a great statement for this time that we're in.
Great. So an anonymous question asks, has anyone actually tabulated the value of what Penn contributes, like funding for things like the contribution to Sadie Alexander School and Lee School, free or reduced medical and dental care, value of wage and other taxes paid by Penn and its employees, funding for UCD, and even Penn police and security? I know that's like a loaded question, so anyone can.
I haven't. No. Is there a part 2 to that question? Or is there? No, I haven't. But what I know is that before COVID, 36% of the people in the 3rd district were in poverty. And what I know is that, almost a majority of the people who lived here are cost burdened in terms of their housing, and people are getting displaced from their neighborhoods. And what I know is we have the zip codes who have had the most people suffer and die from COVID. So whatever is being done, it's great, like I said earlier, but it's not enough, particularly when there's so much wealth to be found here.
Yeah, and I'm sure it doesn't hold a candle to the $14 billion endowment.
Yeah.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
So Diane asks, Jamie and Rick, West Philly has mixed nationalities and cultures. Southwest Philly is predominantly Black. Penn's involvement within Southwest Philly is almost non-existent, though it is in very close proximity. So to finish the question, how can Penn better engage in Southwest Philly?
I think Penn should and can engage in Southwest Philly in a better way. And I think we do that by bringing more resident voices to the table. I would like to be a part of helping there to be more grassroots infrastructures for people to come to the table in Southwest Philly to impact what's going on in their neighborhoods. And I think that maybe creating more of those avenues will also be a way of connecting to Penn. But even outside of that, I think there's a lot that could be done in terms of jobs and making sure we're hiring from Southwest, in terms of procurement and making sure we're engaging with entrepreneurs in the area in a good way, and in terms of housing and making sure that Penn is realizing its impact on Southwest Philadelphia too. And so I thought that I saw who that question came from. I thought it came from Ms. Settles, and I would love to work with her on that.
All right. Would anyone else like
to? Yeah, I mean, I think workforce development and addressing its impact on housing are both really key. And then also, we've spoke on multiple occasions already about the different contributions or investments Penn has made in the surrounding public schools. I do not believe that that investment is the same for the schools in Southwest Philly. So I think generally the school should be thinking about how it is equitably supporting all of the public schools within its footprint. And that includes Southwest Philly schools.
All right, so now we'll be pivoting towards gentrification, which I know we've touched upon to some extent. And so the first question we'll be asking is, to what extent do you think Penn has contributed to gentrification specifically in West Philadelphia? And how can Penn students in search for housing nearby do a better job of not contributing to the problem?
Well, I mean, there are very explicit ways in which it has contributed, in that it is a landlord, like it owns properties, and has not done enough to keep those prices affordable. I also know, and I believe this is a well-meaning program, but the university has a program where it helps employees make a down payment on like houses or within a certain bounds from the university, which in itself also unintentionally spurs gentrification. So there are like very concrete ways in terms of how the university owns property and also how it facilitates the further purchasing of property that I think is a factor in that. And in terms of how students can support, I think the primary way students can support is by also understanding that they suffer, like, I mean, even speaking as myself and thinking about my time as an undergraduate, like there are many students who just deal with whatever apartment they can get from some slumlord, no matter what the price is. And I think oftentimes we just think that we should do that because we don't know any better. But like if students were actually to organize as like activated tenants that also suffer from landlords and gentrification that causes these rent prices to go up because they can sell it to the highest bidder, then they can actually be in relationship with some of the other housing activists and organizers that are trying to change things.
I agree with Rick, and then I would just add in terms of other ways that the university and the hospital contributes to gentrification. I think it contributes through its own development and what that development does to the surrounding properties, and I think it contributes through the people that it attracts. We attract a lot of people here because they want to work at Penn or somehow be in relation to Penn, and that's not a completely negative thing for the area, but we do have to realize what that means in terms of displacement for the people who already lived here. And so that's why this whole conversation about Penn realizing its impact and then making sure that it is contributing in a way that benefits residents is so important. And in terms of what students can do, I think that more students should live on campus. And so that's a kind of a conversation between Penn and its students. And I think that students can be aware of the community, its history, and their place within this community as well. And that they can fight for the things that the community needs. Like I've seen a lot of great student activism pushing the university to actually do the right thing. And I think that's great.
I add a point. I think like Rick made an important point about Penn as a landlord, and I think sometimes there's a tendency to think about gentrification in terms of like, well, how can someone be like a good gentrifier? How can I like say hi to my neighbors more and contribute? And that's all well and good, but I think the crucial issue is like you can do all that, but if the price of the homes are still going up, the most harmful effects are still going to be there. So keeping that, I mean, I think that's kind of that central question of development without raising prices and not making it about profit. And I think also what Rick said in terms of how students can try to build that coalition of emphasizing that, the students might not be suffering as much from it, but they are kind of getting screwed over as well. And that I think that mindset could maybe help build that coalition.
Thank you. So a related question comes from Michelle Liu. To Rick and Jamie, there has been extensive discussion of the responsibility of Penn and Penn students who have been an active force in gentrifying West Philadelphia. However, the same could be said of the young progressives who are moving to West Philadelphia, many of whom who are well educated and come from middle-class suburban backgrounds. What do you think their relationship to the Black community should be? What makes these young progressives similar to or distinct from the Penn students we have been discussing?
So I absolutely think that a lot of the progressives, particularly white progressives who've been moving to the area, I mean, yes, that's like, I don't know, the definition of gentrification, right? So yes, that contributes. But I don't want to give the sense that I'm saying that it's bad to have new people come into our area. It's not. That's a great thing. This is a cool place to live. And I understand why people want to come here. I think what's problematic is when people come here and it displaces other people, right? And there's no remedy for that. There's no protection for that. And there's no recognition for that. And so I think that the folks who are moving into this area can help by organizing with the folks who are here to make sure that we have policies that that protect and don't displace. Make sure that we have policies that get rid of the abatement, right, which is spurring a lot of this development. To make sure that we have policies around, you know, the sizable amount of vacant land that we have in our district that should go towards affordable housing. To the extent that you move here and you really become a part of this community and fight for and respect and fight for the people who are from here, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah, I think Jamie really nailed it on the head with that. You know, people, particularly given this community and knowing that we have universities, we have a varied like sector in terms of different like places of employment. So you're going to have people that are moving in and out of the district, but anyone who is a part of this community should feel invested in it and should feel connected to the people who live there and connected and committed to their well-being. I believe that in something to the second part of the question, I think they are distinct from students in some ways, and that like being a resident of this neighborhood, I think you definitely, I mean, everyone has a responsibility to be committed to like the well-being of our neighbors and our neighborhoods, but particularly as folks who are coming to be long-term residents, I think that responsibility is even higher. And also like recognizing that we all suffer, because ultimately like 5-10 years, like we're all getting pushed out by developers. Like they're coming for all of our houses. They're coming for all of the things that can be torn down and sold to the next cycle of people that are trying to come in and have a higher income bracket, right? So I think trying to have some of that understanding will be important as well.
I have an example, if I can give one, that I thought was beautiful. So the group of residents that organized against the Callahan Ward development near Malcolm X Park. So this was a situation where a developer was trying to build, I don't know, like a 33-unit property on a flag lot that was essentially people's alleys. And this group of residents that included you know, white, well-to-do progressives and long-term Black residents, they organized like nothing I have seen before to stop this development. And what I appreciated about it was both the energy and the vigor of the activism, but also that they really made sure to center the voices of the longtime Black residents who had been on that block. And I think that's what folks who move here should be aiming to do.
And kind of to piggyback on that, yeah, I think for people who identify as activists, I think one thing is to not make assumptions about what you think people are at politically. I mean, I think the issue of policing is one. I think there's this assumption, and it's like there's definitely not some kind of like uniform Black opinion on policing. Like it gets very complicated. I mean, especially, you know, if there's a lot of crime in your area, your knee-jerk reaction is probably going to be, well, we need more police. So, you know, there has to be a lot of listening and engaging to really tease out where people are coming from. So, yeah, I think sometimes there's an assumption like, well, of course, all Black people are already on board with some things about policing. So just to not make assumptions.
So I have a bit of a bureaucratic question coming up from Diane. It is my understanding that the housing program for Penn employees is partially or totally funded through the block grant that comes from the federal government to the city of Philadelphia. Historically, this program was facilitated through PHDC. Does Penn add their own contribution to this program?
I don't believe that's true. I think the community development block grant only goes to the city, and it only goes to the city, I believe, and to some organizations that are involved in like housing production. I don't have knowledge that that's true, but if someone wants me to follow up on that, I can. I think that Penn funds that program on its own.
Got it. So the next question comes from an anonymous attendee. As a follow-up to the previous question, this was like a while back, are any of the panelists familiar with Work Ready? If so, how could this program be expanded to better support students and create more jobs for young people and adults?
I could start. I kind of hate to answer this way because I don't want to seem like my head is in the clouds all the time, but I kind of look at, because some of my students have had experience with that, and it's one of these programs to me that they're good and fine, but it's like, I think to get at the heart of the matter, we kind of need to think bigger. And of course, that's easier said than done. But, and the other thing I think with job training to keep in mind, it's one thing to train for jobs, but what about if you're training for jobs that are not necessarily there, or there aren't necessarily enough jobs to go around? One of my favorite quotes from the famous civil rights activist Bayard Rustin, talking about, riots in the 60s, is saying, if you train a young, poor Black kid for a job that's not there, you're basically putting a Molotov cocktail in their hand, because it's almost like you're raising this expectation that can't be met, which of course is not an argument against jobs programs, but it's like we got to make sure we are actually creating not just a few, but like many good jobs. And of course, that's a hard thing to do and answer, but yeah.
I mean, I'm familiar with Work Ready. My son has participated in the past. I think it's a positive program. I think it helps kids to have real experiences. And I would like to see programs like that expanded. And I actually would like to see them really targeted to some of the youth in neighborhoods being ravaged by gun violence. We need jobs now for these youth. And so we should be doing more of this.
Yeah, I think echoing what both Paul and Jamie said, and not making sure that jobs exist, and also that they are good paying jobs, because also like sending kids to end up just working for minimum wage is also a real good way to have them become demoralized. So I think connected to this is also the conversation about a livable wage.
All right, great. The next question comes from Val. It asks, when Penn Alexander School was created, the catchment area was drawn such that it would be a majority BIPOC student body. However, the area quickly transformed, in part because it passed into an unaffordable neighborhood serving affluent, mainly white families, taking advantage of excellent free public education, displacing people of color families. As Rick mentioned, we have in this area around Penn, despite heavy gentrification, many at-risk Black homeowners and renters. How do we protect those residents from the relentless crush of gentrifying development and increasingly unaffordable rents and home prices?
I think a lot about this. This is like the majority of what I'm working on. And so I think there are a few ways that we can approach it. One, I think we have to have mandatory inclusionary zoning. I don't think that developers should just be able to build housing that people can't afford, right? And I don't think that we should leave whether our neighborhoods are affordable or not up to the benevolence of developers. We should, through policy, mandate that they have to include affordable units. Right now, what we have is an optional ordinance. And so that's something I'm working on. I absolutely think that we should make use of the huge amount of vacant publicly owned property that we have. That property should go towards affordable housing. And we should also be looking more towards forms of community ownership that would create permanently affordable housing. We have to do more to protect renters. We need stronger laws that will help to, protect people from eviction, and that will help people to manage, their rent, right? A lot of the people who live here can barely afford their rent. They're paying anywhere from 30 to 50% of their income on their rent. And in the case of longtime homeowners, I think we need more programs that will help them on upkeep. A lot of people in Philadelphia outright own their homes, but they still have issues with paying their property taxes and with paying for repairs. And we have to help those folks if we don't want them to be displaced. So those are some of the things that I think can help.
Right.
Yeah, I think Jamie provided a pretty comprehensive answer. Just to add some other things that I think would be really beneficial. All of the things around protecting homeowners, and in particular with renters. One policy that I'm in favor of is rent control, and thinking about what kind of rent control policies we can put in the area to actually have some ways to make sure that we hold landlords accountable to rents that are affordable according to the existing income of the community that's there. Also, just speaking a bit on some of the state level stuff, there is funding that comes through some quasi-state entities around housing, particularly around grants towards development that just kind of happen without much transparency or oversight at all. So I think there's also a real need around more oversight and transparency just around funding that gets approved for development. And doing that, we can hopefully intercept some of this and actually make sure that whether that policy is being enforced, and even where we can have policies that we can enforce, we at least can advocate to make sure that these things are being protected.
Great. So the next question from Eric Orts goes, how can Penn best help to address the significant recent increase in gun violence in Philadelphia?
I think I'd like to see a few things. One, a lot of the gun violence happening in West and Southwest Philadelphia are younger people, right? And it's not even all drug related. Some of it is drug related. A lot of it is are these kind of turf battles. And so I think that we can help by connecting young people to opportunity. So jobs that young people can flow into right now that'll pay them a good income. I think, a lot of folks in our neighborhoods are traumatized and they need access to behavioral health services. I also think that we need more supports for victims and co-victims. I've been kind of, as our city has been going through this, I've been visiting a lot of these sites, right, as this violence has happened. And one thing that stands out to me is how little we're offering to help people who are going through trauma. People are suffering, and Penn can be a part of that solution. Additionally, I think we can do more in terms of hospital-based intervention programs. A lot of the folks who are getting involved in gun violence are going to hospitals, and that's a place where we can intervene and make a difference. And so I would love to have a comprehensive conversation with Penn and the University of Pennsylvania around ways we can partner on this issue. I do also want to commend Penn on its recent investment in Mercy. If Penn hadn't stepped in with Mercy, we would have lost Mercy. And so I just want to make sure that was said, since I neglected to say it in the beginning.
All right. So a great deal of discussion today has centered around this idea of Penn doing the right thing. So this question reads, if Penn as an actor prides self-interest over doing the right thing, what other aspects of Penn's incentive structure can be exploited to convince Penn to behave more ethically?
Well, I'll jump in. I think one is they care about their reputation and press. And so and again, there is a Penn for Pilots movement that I think has been growing and growing in stature. And so getting that word out, and I think getting more, the more the movement grows and gets allies, the more it becomes embarrassing for Penn to be on the other side of that. So I think publicity is a big tool and really just like hammering away at it. And I think you're right. I mean, I don't expect them to do it just out of their self-interest, because I don't think it aligns with what's right all the time. So that's where students have a big role to play. If, it's really, they have a role to play in building that pressure and organizing themselves. And that's, I think, one avenue to be getting pressure on Penn.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the organizing tactics that Paul laid out are 100% correct. I mean, ultimately, we have to make it clear that this is part of what it means to be like a good partner in this neighborhood, that being more equitable in its distribution of resources and the way it relates is part of it. But also, I mean, I think we have to continue having conversations in spaces like this where we can change the hearts and minds of the broader Penn community, right? Because we can't start from the top down. We have to be able to actually also engage with all of the stakeholders, students, faculties, administration, staff, et cetera, that are part of this institution. And we have to also make it clear that as members of the institution, there is a responsibility in holding the university accountable. And I think that'll aid towards being able to also push Penn and its ultimate, its board and the president in understanding that this is the right thing to do.
I too think that people power is going to be the thing that wins this. I think, there had already been a growing movement towards pilots, but now the entire world has shifted, right? Like, not only have we had a significant amount of unrest following the murder of George Floyd, where I think people are like, we're not going to take it anymore. We've also hit COVID, which has shown like just how much need there exists in our communities. And so I just feel like we're operating in a different reality where this conversation becomes more possible and more probable. But certainly, and the city also doesn't have, at least now, the power to kind of enforce pilots. But certainly the university has to interact with the city in a number of ways. And so the way that I see my interaction with Penn and any other institution and any developer that comes, across my desk is to make sure that I'm using my power to push for the ultimate community benefit that I can get. And so I do think that every kind of or project is an opportunity to push for more.
You're on mute.
Michelle has a follow-up question. Michelle says that they're a young worker not originally from West Philly, but are committed to bettering the neighborhood. How are you addressing the issue of the Black community home ownership? Do you believe this is a central issue for West Philly? What do you understand that the current primary concerns of the West Philly Black community to be?
I mean, it's absolutely a core concern of the community because of how many Black homeowners there are. I mean, I think the factors that play into maintaining Black home ownership are ones that have been covered. Making sure that we can promote affordable housing so that property taxes don't go up and so that older folks don't end up losing their homes. Having ways to protect homeowners, having things around subsidizing home repairs, making sure that we end things like the tax abatement so that we also don't increase the burden on homeowners around funding the school district through property taxes. I think having on the state level just a complete overhaul of the tax system because it is so regressive and we leave so much money on the table when it comes to taxation. That means, again, that all of this falls on the backs of homeowners who are being told again and again and again to compensate. So I think all of those things are a core factor in addressing it. And I think it's both an issue that we can push our pen around, but I think from the local all the way up to the state level, there are things that we can do to protect Black homeowners and by extension protect the holding of Black generational wealth, right? Which is also what gets lost.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Rick said. I think that Black home ownership is incredibly important because it's been a traditional means in our country of building generational wealth. I will say I'm nervous about where we are. We are currently a majority renter city we just kind of crossed into that, we just reached that, milestone maybe, I don't know, a year ago. And there's nothing wrong with renting, but renting is just more precarious, right? Renters are the most vulnerable people in our city. And so I'm nervous about what I'm seeing. I'm nervous that all the developers who come here only want to build high cost rental that, no one can afford. And so I want to push for the development of more affordable homeownership opportunities because I do think that's crucial in, building, a stable life.
Just real quickly, I'll add, I mean, going back to this thing about public sector jobs, I wish I had this statistic to just rattle off right now, but, studies have shown that Black public sector workers are significantly more likely to own homes than private sector workers. And, it's not really a mystery because these jobs, again, are heavily unionized and better pay and benefits. So that all, ties in as well.
Muted again.
My bad. So I'll be taking a few more questions and then we can wrap the event up. So this one comes from Dana Reed. Please talk more about zoning improvements that are achievable in Philadelphia. Maybe stopping the emphasis on single family zoning to allow for multifamily owner occupied houses, ?
Sure. So absolutely, I think we should use the zoning code as a means of pressing for affordability with mandatory inclusionary housing, with a mandatory inclusionary ordinance. But I also think that we can be more creative and more open to density over time, right? And to different means of housing. So to the extent that we have a mandatory ordinance in place that says that people have to build affordably, I think we will be able to allow for more density because that gets us more housing, right? And relieves some of the pressure. To the extent that we can explore things like accessory dwelling units, which create the opportunity for somebody to buy a home and then also to have an income opportunity, right? That's a means of allowing people to live in neighborhoods that right now might be out of their reach. And so I do think we can use zoning in some really creative ways, even though some of these conversations are hard because people are kind of used to what has traditionally existed in Philadelphia.
Right, so this next question is for Councilmember Gauthier. I wanted to ask Councilmember Gauthier about her link to Philadelphia 3.0. What is her stance towards the rezoning of many parts of Cedar Park?
Sure. So Philly 3.0 is an independent expenditure organization that supported my campaign for city council. And so what an IE is, it's an organization where people can donate without sort of having that information disclosed, and they can't coordinate with a campaign during the election, but they can spend in favor of a campaign or against a campaign. And Philly 3.0 endorsed me and spent in favor of me. And I think that made a lot of people uncomfortable. I think people are rightfully distrustful of what are considered dark money organizations, and had a lot of questions for me during the campaign and still throughout, even like, I don't know, 9 months or a year, 2 years later. and I think that was a risk that I took. I spent my whole life working for the things that I'm pushing for now. I'm an urban planner. I worked for a long time on affordable housing issues in the city. I've wanted to be in council, for at least the past decade. And so I think I took a political risk, competing against someone that I knew was going to be hard to compete against. But I do understand people's skepticism. I will say that, I think I've proven since I've been in office and that whose side I'm on. I passed last session with council members Brooks and Gim, some of the largest bills to come out of council around protecting renters who had suffered a COVID-related income loss. I fought for affordable housing money to get back in our budget, and I consistently position myself on the side of the people and actually against big development interest in my day-to-day work. And the other question was about zoning, and I'm not quite sure. I participate in a lot of zoning issues in Cedar Park, so I'm not quite sure what the specific question is around that.
All right, great. So this question is for Jamie and Rick. Do you think it is conceivable for senior citizens to be grandfathered into their current real estate taxes so that when new development or upscale rehab properties occur in their neighborhoods, they are not taxed out?
Do I think it's conceivable? Yes. I think it's like something we should push for. I'll admit I'm not like clear on the policy mechanisms to do so, but I'm in favor broadly of making sure that seniors get to stay in their homes and their communities. So whatever things we can do to make that happen, I'm in support of.
We do have a senior citizen real estate tax freeze currently in the city. I think a lot of times what happens is that a lot of folks in Philly have like tangled title issues. So they may have gotten their property from a relative that died, right? And they never got the property in their name, which blocks them out of participating in any city program that will offer them assistance. So I think, and it kind of makes them at risk for losing their property or being tricked out of their property. So I think we have to spend some time making sure that folks have the titles to their property and that they are fully participating in city programs. In fact, I think we should like automatically enroll people in the programs that they're eligible for.
All right, great. So for the final question, how can we provide and how can Penn help create a healthy environment in West Philadelphia through tree canopies, green spaces, community gardens? Studies show that mental and physical health also have to do with a healthy, non-toxic environment. It looks like a lot of the development going up is wiping out tree canopy and green spaces, which some in the Black community have complained about, including the recent sale and demolition of churches in that area, which often feature large green spaces that families and neighborhood children have made use of. So I suppose the question is, how can we make sure that our neighborhood is greener? Yeah.
I think we should have more development guidelines around greening. I think it's really critical that one, that we don't develop over every square foot of our neighborhood with concrete, right? And I think we should have open and green spaces, and we should make sure that developers are meeting that mandate. I also think we should make sure to preserve open green spaces that the city owns and that can be turned into community spaces.
Yeah, I think facilitating the ability for people to acquire like lots to use for urban and community gardens is critical. And also, I think obviously Penn can play an advocacy role in doing this, but this is something that's on the responsibility of government to facilitate and to incentivize like developers in the market to promote these kind of green spaces. So I think, as Jamie said, like having some guidelines, even doing things where we can subsidize green development, right? To make sure that we're promoting green space. I mean, ultimately, right, if we're going to move towards more green housing, more environmental, like healthy environmental policy, we have to both, as legislators that believe in it, push for it, but also have to figure out how we hold developers accountable and then incentivize the development of that kind of infrastructure.
And also, I think there's a way, to think about it, even again, in terms of jobs, like how could we create jobs for people to, green spaces? I mean, my mind immediately went to how during the New Deal, you had a lot of workers hired literally just to plant trees. And, we have Saul Agricultural High School, there could be a partnership and training for students coming out of there. I mean, they got a nice stable job for the city, like with that purpose of, not just not eliminating trees where they are, but like planting them in some places where they aren't.
That would be amazing.
All right, great. With that, we come to the end of this event. I'd like to thank all three panelists for taking out time today to have this really important discussion. I hope members of the audience from the Penn community learned from this, and I really do hope that this is a step in the right direction for us and to figure out what to do better. With that being said, would the Mitchell Center like to say anything, Jeff?
Just to thank you and the other panelists for being here and share your sentiments that we hope this is a positive, constructive event. It sure seems like it was. And to thank the 120 some odd people who were part of it as attendees. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sarah and all for putting this together and giving me the invitation to speak. Appreciate it. And hope everyone enjoys your night. Take care.